Hello everybody, this is Gregor from PreSonus and I'm very excited for a special video today for me personally as well. This has been an absolute honor to make. What you're about to see is a video interview that I've conducted with Konyi, the artist, multi-instrumentalist and music producer behind the brand new Studio 16 demo song. This has probably been one of the most inspirational conversations of my life. We talked about all things music, music production, the meaning of life, philosophy, and much more. And hopefully you're going to enjoy this. It's going to be a bit different to my usual video content that I post here regularly, but hopefully you're going to enjoy it regardless. If you're interested in the entire video, I'm going to show you just a few snippets here of my favorite bits of our conversation. Then please consider joining PreSonus Sphere. PreSonus Sphere is a membership platform where you get not just the latest version of Studio and Professional, in this case it's version 6, as well as Notion, all of our add-ons and plugins, tons and tons of gigabytes of loops and sound library content, but also live streams like our mix critiques that I'm doing with Joe Gilder every month, where we listen to your mixes and critique them live on stream. We also have tons of exclusive videos that are not available on our YouTube channel, and also gems like the exclusive interview that you're about to see. Hopefully you will enjoy it as much as I did, and thank you for watching.
The sky is still studded with stars, so let's not think and go with the rhythm of the night. Don't be shy and feel the rhythm.
Wow, I have so many questions right away. I mean, this is such a masterpiece in my book. First of all, how important do you think it is to be able to play the actual instruments such as bass or maybe keyboards to come up with such an arrangement? Because it does feel like many of the parts have to be played live, right? You can't really program that in. Is that something that you would agree with?
I'm not sure. I think that it's more important that someone is deeply attentive to listening to genres like that. So I'm not a great bass player, for instance, and I love bass though, and everything, drums, keyboards, whatever. So I listen to bassists. I watch bass masterclasses from legendary players. I listen to it in every genre. And what that does is it allows you to gain an intuitive sense of being able to and then from there you can straight up program that. Like, you don't need to play that. When I did the bass in the chorus section, which is a very active kind of, I don't know what you say, syncopated line, I didn't actually play it at first. I was just on the keyboard and programming. And then actually someone else played the bass, Perry T, who you know. He played the bass for this track. And I was actually practicing to play it myself because I'm not, like I say, a great player. So I was like working on it for a few days, and he was like, hey, I can play that. I said, please, you're going to play it better than me. So to finish responding to your question, I think a lot of this can be done without actually having great facility on instruments. The most important part, though, is having an ear for what you love. If you have an ear for the sounds you love and you know what you want to hear, then that, with a combination of theory, will allow you to make stuff like this for sure.
Wonderful.
So this was not improvised, to be sure. This was done in this exact fashion. I let that part loop, and then I actually recorded directly into the mic that I have here, just, for lack of a better term, humming or beatboxing without any actual distinct pitches. I'm not like a great singer, so I can't just straight up sing these things. I'm just doo-da-doo-doo-doo, ba-ba-doo, literally like this, scatting, basically, terrible pitchless scatting. And then going to the guitar and being like, okay, what is this? How does this work? Because then you have a kind of template, a kind of framework in which to input the notes over top of this blueprint that I've created. And then the note choices all come from what the current chord is and blah, 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 all that sort of theoretical stuff. And yeah, that's how it ended up. So even being a guitar player primarily as my main instrument, I don't always just sit down and say, oh, here's a 6 solo, I'm just going to rip it right now. I actually start with my voice, because I find that the voice is the most agile and the most connected to feeling. You know, you don't have to navigate any interface with your hands or anything. It's just straight out, right? And
Wow.
that immediacy, I feel like, gives me often the best organic feel to all of my parts. And then I try to work that way very often.
That's fascinating to me. Do you often decouple rhythm from melody like that?
Yeah, it's kind of one of my, I don't know if I would call it tricks or secrets. It's almost like I don't know if I would say I'm ashamed of it. It's a thing that I do all the time. And in a lot of my solos, keyboard solos and stuff, that if people ever listen to my tracks, they can hear some pretty wild solos sometimes. It's literally done even one step more ridiculous. I'm playing on the keyboard completely random notes, but with exactly the feel and rhythmic phrasing that I want, just hitting anything at all. So long as the feel comes out right, then I'm going to go in and I'm going to move those things one at a time, just like I talk about on the guitar, except now we're working in MIDI, so it's easier to do. Because getting that rhythmic feel, like you say, right, for me is like 90% of the battle. You can almost, if your rhythmic feel is banging, you can hit wrong notes the whole time. And people are going to be like, yep, sounds great.
I have to say, I'm just so mind blown to hear this because I thought I'm the only person who does it this way. Like, I've also used these voice memos, not with the exact notes, but just to have groove maps, you know, kind of like the transients very well separated from each other so that the MIDI translation would work well. Everything would be exactly in the spot where it has to be. And then I would worry about the transposition later. And at first I also thought maybe this is not the right way to do it, or maybe this is, as you say, a bit ridiculous. But I think it puts your focus so much on the feel, the groove, that the melody will come by itself just because the notes are just so perfectly placed, also in the context of the other instruments. So I think this is really a secret super weapon. And anyone who hasn't tried this out yet, definitely give this a shot, because you can hear in this guitar solo how successful this approach is.
You blessed with the best. All night rocking with you, rolling like a train, baby, choo, hot like I'm cinnamon, drop like a Benjamin, bounce, check, with my love in.
Like, I have to actually admit that I've saved this as a track preset for future reference for some of my own bass lines and such. So how do you make a Mai Tai sound this mean, or what's your approach to such a signal chain?
Well, my approach with synthesis, I did work as a sound designer professionally for a couple of years. So making synth presets just all day, every day. So I have a lot of practice doing it. My philosophy is the synth should be, the actual patch in the synth should be as simple as possible. So I'm using the most basic waveforms I possibly can. Even in making kind of EDM growly type sounds, I want to use the simplest things I can get away with so as to avoid added unnecessary complexity in the beginning. So the patch is probably very simple. I mean, it's a saw wave, right? Filtered saw wave, of course, that's where you're going to start.
Yeah, Max, maybe I can just turn off the inserts really quickly and just let people listen to the raw sound.
Yeah.
Wow. That is really like almost a basic sawtooth waveform, just one oscillator too, not even two oscillators.
Exactly. Yeah, I like to keep it as simple as possible. And then the goal is within that first patch, you need to have some degree of movement. The movement is filter change and volume change over time, as well as an initial punch, because I want, you know, especially in these 808 things, you want that attack to be like a kick, right? So I'm using, I think, probably, maybe it's somewhere, yeah, that one, envelope 2, doing oscillator 1 pitch. You know, if you don't know that trick, you just pitch shifting the thing real quick right at the start and makes it sound like a kick drum. Boom, 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 that sort of idea. That's, of course, a big part of getting the impact, getting the like mean quality.
Maybe I can just play that with the modulation and without. So I just put that back to 0. No attack. And when I turn this up, it gets so much more snappiness.
at the start now, instead of ooh, ooh, ooh.
Yeah.
And the thing is, when you run that through a distortion, which of course is the whole secret of basses in general, is then that punch gets distorted and the modulation over time causes the distortion to behave differently as the sound evolves, which is the whole fascinating aspect of bass design.
So when I just go to the first insert effect here after the original sound, that would be red light distortion, and that would make it sound from this, like this. Completely different, wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Is that something you could achieve with any kind of distortion, or is there a certain preference that you have when it comes to distortions?
I just love distortion. I love distortion in all of its varieties, and I just want it to make my face curl. I love that feeling. And so I just love playing with red light and just trying different types, different stages, different amounts, pushing the drive instead of pushing the drive, pushing the gain in, changing the frequency balance. I'll spend an hour on that, just getting the distortion right, because it's those little details that make all the difference, right? And if you just slap on any distortion and say, yep, turn up the knob, okay, it's going to sound different. But, it's spending the hour, it's spending the time fine tweaking that really makes all the difference, in my opinion.
When do you decide that such a signal chain is done, or maybe requires another plugin?
Good question. I don't know. I feel like it gets to a point where it's just either I'm looking at the number of plugins on my chain and I'm like, I can't afford to do anymore, or it just, you get the feeling. I mean, with music in general, I work until the experience of listening is smooth. If I can listen through a whole song and nothing goes, then I know it's done. But as soon as, if there's a little tinge of anything that I'm dissatisfied with, it thinks, yeah, that feeling, learning to identify that is so key, because then just go change it. So when I heard this sound at this point, it didn't pique me anymore. I thought, oh, it's good.
Have you sometimes made that experience that you might be mixing for too long and that you're getting into some kind of tunnel focus where that judgment that you just described is a bit hard to make?
All the time.
Yeah. Do you have any advice how to combat that? Because that's something that rings true for me.
I mean, basically, long sessions are for composing, short sessions are for mixing. And
I need to write that
nighttime
down.
is for composing, and daytime is for mixing. And then never release a song until you've given it like at least multiple days, if not a week or two, without listening to it. Come back again. It's so hard to do because, especially at the end of a song, like with this one, I worked a long time. I don't know how many hours it took me to make the track, right? It was a lot of work. I love that. But also by the end, you're like, I don't want to hear this anymore. It gets to that point where, especially in the mixing phase, and you just want to be like, okay, that's done. Bye. Send it away, right? But can't do that. Have to say, okay, that's done. I need to come back in like 5 days. Because then as soon as you come back, all these problems. You're like, oh man, I'm so glad I did that.
I'm kind of shocked how much alike we are. I never sent something off before. I absolutely hated it because I'm so much of a perfectionist. I think it turned out for the better for other people, but I kind of feel I had to sacrifice the magic for me to bring the magic to other people, maybe.
Probably anyone who produces music understands that there are these two challenges. Making sections that work together, especially when you've created already one loop, making a new section can be very difficult, that is different but still coherent. And then transitioning them. So it's not just like boom, boom. How do you actually make it sound smooth? Because when you're working in a DAW, everything is in little blocks. And so it's so visually simple to be like block, 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 but then your music sounds like blocks. Right, so you got to come up with ways of unblockifying, liquefying the song to sound more natural, and that was a real challenge.
I think you just touched on something that most, especially electronic music producers that I'm talking to, are struggling with, and that is how to turn your loops into songs. Like, can you give some advice how to build these transitions to make block A to block B seem like the most natural thing ever? Like it couldn't be any other way.
100%. So I have two main suggestions. Number one is, and this is assuming you don't have block B yet, you only have block A. Remember that your instinctive sense of music is faster than your mental sense of music and faster than your physical ability. So when you play your block A, allow it to come near the end, start vocalizing something that makes sense to you. So usually this could be like a melody or a bass line or a drum pattern or whatever. Like, what would happen? Don't try to imagine, just let your voice go and do something out the end of section A. And usually you'll want to start that maybe like a few beats ahead of the end of the section. So if the section is coming to an end, then you can start going da 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 da. You have a little rising melody or something that helps to smooth the transition. The idea being speak, sing, beatbox, hum what feels natural to you, and then use it as a template, like we talked about, fill in the blanks.
That's fascinating. Key. Would you recommend recording that as you're doing it so you have like a reference, or?
100%.
Okay. I've never tried that out before, and I'm dying to try this out now. So do you think that if you just listen to music enough that has been recorded outside of a DAW, outside of this block grid environment, that you can learn certain techniques that are translatable into the block DAW environment? So you can break out of the block design of the DAW then?
100%. It's super important. I think like one thing I try to emphasize in some of my teachings is what I call baby listening. And this means listening as though you've never heard anything before.
Yeah.
So when you're listening, you're not hearing even music. You're not even hearing sound. You're not naming instruments. You're not thinking of anything. You want to be trying to experience what the music really is. What actually is music? It's not all our ideas about it. It's the sound. It's the sound in real time as it streams through. And when you get back to that, it actually changes the way you perceive music altogether. It's this fluid, ever-changing, momentary thing. It slips away. You can't hold on to it. It's not fixed. It's not rigid. Even when you think about, oh, I have these instruments and they're playing this and they're playing this. When you push play, that's not happening. That's not happening. That's a mental idea. What's really happening is this ever-changing, fluid, momentary thing. That perception is really easy to find when you listen to orchestral music and classical music because of often the lack of drums, and the instruments are not electronic and they're not so jin, 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 jin. They're all flowing, right? And so I feel like a combination of this baby listening with orchestral music, even if you're a hip hop producer, even if you're an EDM producer, is massively beneficial. It will not even just give you a new idea. It will like shift your perspective on what music is, which lets you change how you write fundamentally.